So today I want to review the Sidney Poitier film To Sir with Love, and definitely this is one of the best Sidney Poitier films that he's ever done. And he plays an African British school teacher who goes to who goes to a school in London that has kids with like behavioral issues, and he tries to like teach these children. So things don't work out well in the beginning. He promised that he's not going to lose his temper and whatever. And then, a couple of things happen where he kind of like has an outburst. Then he kind of realizes in his outburst that these kids just want to be treated like adults. And then he kind of just says that, okay, from now on, we're not going to learn from the books. We're going to be more about like life skills, and we're going to be more about, seeing you guys as adults and treating you guys like adults. And whenever you act like kids, I'm going to treat you like a kid type of thing. There's this kid in the class who just walks in rudely, and he says, like, like you're, walking like a lady because you walked into like a brat type of thing. And it kind of goes through the movie, like, with like that mentality and his thinking. And then also, and also just where he goes towards the end of the film. And it's an interesting film because it did well at the box office across the world. It was also banned in some countries because some people didn't like the idea of a black teacher teaching a majority white class. I think it was banned in South Africa, like on the Amazon Trivia. So it was very disturbing that it was like that. But it was obviously the 1960s when apartheid was around in many different countries. But I think that, as far as the film goes, they did a lot of really good things with this. I think, and I also did some things that were pretty bad. I think that the biggest gripe with the film is that when you looked at the classroom of these kids, a lot of them just looked like stereotypes. There was a lot of kids that looked like they were in their 20s, or even their 30s, and there were also just some kids, who just, like they had like the weaves and whatever at that time. And then there were some kids who had like the Marlon Brando like black jacket. So like some of it was kind of credible and some of it wasn't kind of credible. And then there were also like some kids I looked up their ages. Some of them were like 14, and then some of them were like in their 20s or 30s. So it just looked kind of like a little inaccurate. And then I think like what some people saw when they watched this film was that they felt that with all these kids being different ages and then being different stereotypes, it was almost like what they say about like what you realize when you watch bad films of high school is that it's a bunch of adults in the writing room writing the story and not being in touch with the concurrent generation. John Huston does a great job in The Breakfast Club. But there are a lot of people who really, really fail at that. They kind of just have a stereotype of what high schoolers are like. But I think that there's a lot of strengths. I think Sidney Poitier does a very great job in this film. I think that he goes from, just being this really, really serious teacher that's just looking to get into an engineering job because that's what his degree is in. It's more money, it's less stress, to changing his mind at the very end that that's not what he wants to do. And then also just, having an approach of just being very controlling to just, okay, well, all you kids want to be treated like adults and respected like adults. So I'm going to treat you on that level until you don't have that respect. And I think also disturbingly, in the film, there was the student who has a crush on him, and then they dance at the end of the film. So it was weird, but I know at the time there were films like Lolita, which came out in 1963, where you kind of saw the young girl being attracted to the older man. And then definitely in psychology, there is that, complex where if a girl doesn't have a father figure, usually they are attracted to an older man or a man with authority to kind of compensate for the father. That's not everybody's psychology, but that does happen. The daddy complex, as they call it. But it was definitely very controversial, and obviously it is more controversial because obviously Sidney Poitier being a dark-skinned black and the other actress being white and like dancing in white clothing. There's a lot of people that that was a very huge risk because there was definitely a lot of racism definitely at that time. And I also kind of think that 1967 was a very big year for Sidney Poitier. He also did In the Heat of the Night this year, so he was like he was definitely becoming. This was definitely like his zenith. So it's a very interesting film, and I think that the other thing that I would say is that there was really good editing with the film. Like they did a lot of crossfades to show like the passage of time. I was very impressed with the museum scene where they just did a lot of still frames because sometimes that there's a lot of people who can do that and make very powerful still frames, and there's a lot of people who don't. And I think that they did a really good job with that. And I think like obviously it's because it would be hard to kind of film in a museum with a bunch of characters, and obviously with characters that are delinquents, it would be very hard to kind of make that credible. So just like maybe like a highlight reel. They kind of did kind of some really good editing tricks. I think also that I like this cinematography. Like they do really a lot of good, just like they did a lot of good blocking within this movie. Like sometimes you see Sidney Poitier. Like Sidney Poitier was talking to a kid who had an issue with his father. So Sidney Poitier, you see him talk to this kid. This kid like goes in the background a little bit. He's up against like a brick wall, so he saw like the spatial line of the brick wall, from foreground to background, and then Sidney Poitier is like a little close while that kid is in the distance. So they did a lot of good blocking and compositions to kind of set the tone, and it's stuff that I will study. So it was directed very well, and the cinematography was done very well. I think that I think that when I watch this film, it's very well made, and I also think it's one of the best Sidney Poitier films. And I've also been happy to review a couple of these Sidney Poitier films, like to celebrate his life and his legacy. And I think that there's nothing else I want to say about this. I think it was a really great movie. I think that there's some really good social commentary. I think that one thing that's really interesting is that they do talk about him being a black teacher, but that's not really brought up until the end. I think that if I remember correctly in the film, they want to bring flowers to a kid's grave, and then it's like they're talking about like how Mark, the character Sidney Poitier played. They had to stop by his house to get the flowers, or if he wants to pick it up, and they pick it up from his house. It was either that, or they were going to have like a party at his house, like to celebrate the end of the year. It was one of those things that they were saying that they couldn't really do anything at his house because people would spread rumors since he's black and everybody is white. And then also he dealt with a lot of racial jokes. Like obviously, like, I think like one of the teachers was saying that he should do some black magic. And he was pointing out that he was black and other things like that. And I think it was they did it well because obviously Sidney Poitier's character, he wanted the job. He just needed money. So obviously, he just kind of tolerated a lot of the racial harassment instead of just kind of standing up and whatever. He just kind of just wanted to hold his position. And this was based on a teacher in high school. So obviously when you're playing a character that wrote a memoir and they didn't respond to racism at one point in their life, then you have to kind of mirror that as a performer. But I think that if it was Mr. Tibbs in that situation, he would act very, very differently. So I think that it definitely had that. I also think that it really captured the attitude of the late 60s where there was a lot of kids who felt like the older generation was really square, but a lot of their fashion sense came from the Beatles. It also came from them being into dance, into being like mini skirts and other stuff like that. It came from the 1920s with the flappers and everything like that. So definitely it was also kind of a little bit about like how when there are kids, sometimes they just act like what they're doing is very counterculture, but actually it was something that was very established decades ago. And I think that it was a good film for what it was. I think that I think the thing that what people liked about it was even though it was a little bit of a stereotype of high school, I think the performances were done very well. I definitely think it was kind of reflected to the youth generation at that time where they wanted to be treated like they're older. I think that having a teacher that does not accept, well, shut up and follow my rules and whatever, that was very counterculture at that time. And then also, like, even nowadays, I work in a psych ward and I do cleaning there. So, like, there's a lot of, like, psychiatrists and, like, people who work there that listen to kids versus just, like, you do this, you do that. I know how your brain thinks and whatever. There's a lot of just, listening to kids and their problems and their parents having drug issues and this and that, and it's all very important because there was a time in history where it was like the Judge Judy method. Shut up and just listen to what I have to say, and you're wrong because you're a kid. And I think that maybe that's why this film appealed to a lot of a larger audience because it didn't really insult people's intelligence. There was a story about Ridley Scott, his film The Last Duel, where he was saying that the biggest reason why the film failed was because young kids were always on their phone. They don't want to learn a fucking thing. So when you have like somebody like what Ridley Scott said, it really just makes people not want to see your work because you just insulted their intelligence. And that's something that you never do. And I think that in this film, that's what I kind of see is that it doesn't really insult anybody's intelligence. Culture was changing at that time, and this film really shows that, and it really shows also the changing attitude of children. The same way in 16 Candles, where it kind of showed that teenagers are not. It's not like Leave It to Beaver or other things like that, where it's like, oh well, everybody goes home and they have a happy life. And 16 and Breakfast Club, it shows that there was a kid that got into trouble because he was being abused by his father. Other ones dealt with depression, and other ones just hung out with the wrong crowd. There was a kid who committed suicide, who wanted to commit suicide. In To Serve with Love, there's a kid who doesn't have a father in the home. There's a kid who doesn't have a mother in the home. There's a kid who is pregnant. There's a kid who's biracial. So it's just like even with Squid Games. There's a lot of representation of different groups, and they do enough with it that in the time it doesn't feel like a stereotype. It feels like actual proof. I think that the only bad thing that I see is that there was like this Asian girl in the movie and they really didn't spend any time with her. She was like the quiet Asian or just there because they needed an extra. They could have done a little bit more of that character. And I also kind of think that it was really interesting. And I think one thing that hurt the film a little bit was like with Sidney Poitier's character, Mark. He got mad at the beginning of the film because there were a bunch of girls who were burning feminine products in like the stove in the in the classroom. So he's saying that's like slutty behavior, and that's kind of the thing that made him angry. So I think that definitely in the film there was kind of a sense that if a woman doesn't act ladylike, they're considered a slut. So I think like he went a little too far with that. But I understand like that he did come from a very conservative time. But I like what he said too, which is true, which is that if you marry somebody that's a slut, it's good for the short term, not good for the long term. It fades out fast, and it's interesting. I think this piece is definitely progressive for its time, but in some cases it isn't, and then in some cases it resonated with an audience because it was mirroring society. In some cases it wasn't. So it was definitely pretty good. Obviously, it was definitely better and more digestible than the Blackboard Jungle. I felt the Blackboard Jungle, which Sidney Poitier was in, it kind of really just stereotyped inner city kids as just very violent and dangerous when there's a lot more dimensions to inner city kids. So and then also you look at films like Dangerous Mind as well, like where people kind of saw it as a bunch of bad inner city kids, mostly minorities, and then they change with the white savior. I think this film, even though you may say that they reversed the roles, like have a black guy be like the savior, he had enough flaws, and he had enough like backwards beliefs, and he had enough like dimensions to his character where it's believable and where it's palatable. Because if you just have the one side is right type of thing, then it does come off as unrealistic and speaking down. And I think that that's why this film was successful, because they do a lot of things in this film that doesn't feel like speaking down to its audience. So To Serve with Love is a great film, and I can't wait to review a few more Sidney Poitier films to celebrate his life and the impact he's had on world cinema.